The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Well, hello and welcome to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio with me, Sam Hells. This is the show where we delve into a person's life, faith and ministry, and it's brought to you in association with the UK's leading Christian magazine, Premier Christianity. If you would like a free sample copy of our latest issue, just go to our website, premierchristianity.com/free sample, type your details in and we would be delighted to send you a free copy of the latest issue. But today, here on The Profile, I'm speaking to Tim Matthews. Tim leads Love Church in Bournemouth, also known as St Swithun's and St Clement's. He was previously an accountant and lived in London. Him and his wife Debbie served on the clergy team of Holy Trinity Brompton, also known as HTB, for 6 years. Tim loves surfing, DIY, and spending time with his wife and his 3 children. And Tim, it's great to have you on the show today.
Well, it's great to be here, Sam. Thank you so much. I'm not sure I'm ready to have you delve into my life, but let's go for it nonetheless.
Let's start with the most important issue. Is it really true that you love DIY?
You know what? It actually is. Yeah, we've had a bit of a project on in the garden at the moment. You know, I never thought I'd be gardening. If someone had said to me, "Oh, you know, Tim, you're gonna enjoy gardening," I'd have just thought, "Kill me now," you know. But yeah, we love it. We inherited not literally inherited. We moved into a place that the back garden was just a total jungle. I mean, a total jungle. So merrily cutting down trees and constructing tree houses for the kids.
That's your project now.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
Can you give me any tips at all? Because I'm one of those terrible people.
What, on DIY?
I'm terrible. I'm absolutely awful. I don't know why. Is it one of those things where either you've got it or you don't?
No. My tip is get someone else in. Because it's been the bane of my life. But I do it because I enjoy it. You know, it's so different to, you know, sitting in front of a computer or talking to people or, you know, I think we all need those things in life where we can kind of unplug.
Yeah.
For me, mostly that's been water sports. I love water sports. But there's plenty of that down in Bournemouth.
Well, as much as I'd love to conduct a 1-hour interview about DIY, we are here to talk about your new book. It's called Love Church, Join the Adventure of Hope, and it's out now. It's really all about how you planted a new church in Bournemouth. But, you know, I mean, some would say, look, church plants happen all the time. So why the book? Why are you sitting down and writing this? What makes it different?
Well, I'd never had it in mind to write a book. What happened down in Bournemouth was quite unusual in that 4 years ago we started with... there was Debbie and I and our 3 young kids with 9 other adults. One of those couples had a baby. That was great. That was church growth. Baby right there. One of the others got a cat. We counted the cat. But that was the starting group 4 years ago. Now we look around. Many Sundays there's 600 plus worshippers across 2 sites, loads of services, all these ministries, all these groups, all this, the gospel being done and felt and experienced. And we just think, wow, what's happening? It's quite unusual.
Yeah.
And so people said to us, look, you should really write some of this story down. And I started doing that. To be honest, just for the fun of it, it was kind of cathartic to do that. And other people began reading some of that as I began talking about it and saying, oh, that's really encouraging. Eventually we turned it into a book. I think there's a lot of energy now going into church planting around the nation, which is so exciting. I hope it encourages. And, I've tried to be really honest about all the stuff we got wrong, frankly. Most of the book is full of all the stuff we got wrong. It's a bit like my DIY, okay,
We'll have to talk more about that as we go on. But here on The Profile, we always like to go back to a person's early life, basically. I understand your dad was a Church of England vicar. So growing up, was it kind of always apparent that you'd follow in his footsteps?
No, and that was something I resisted for the longest time. In fact, when it came to getting ordained, I was merrily, as you mentioned earlier, I was merrily working in the City of London at that time as an accountant. And I was kind of horrified by the idea that God might be calling me to get ordained and become a vicar, I just had such a negative preconception about that. And it wasn't because of my dad, my dad's a lovely man, and but it was the notion of being caught in churches that are stone cold and austere, and all those negative preconceptions about church that I think many of us carry. But thank God, is actually becoming increasingly rare now as more and more lively churches are around. But I think I carried that, and I resisted it because of that.
So you resisted a kind of, I guess, a call to ultimately church plant. But when you were younger, did you have like a very strong faith, kind of growing up in a Christian family?
Well, I grew up in a stable, loving family home. Just me, my sister, my mum and dad. There was one thing. My dad church planted himself onto a council estate just outside Leicester, in this tiny community room in the middle of that estate. It had a tin roof. It was freezing cold in winter, and when it rained, I mean, you literally couldn't hear. There wasn't any PA or anything. When it rained, no one could hear anything because it was so loud on that tin roof. And most of the time, my mum would just try and keep us quiet, by feeding us sweets, me and my sister. But I remember one Sunday when I got upset for some reason or other, and I ran forward to the front, and my dad was just about to start preaching, and I sat on my dad's foot, and I wrapped my arms around his leg, and I just clung on for dear life, expecting my mum to kind of come and remove me. But my dad didn't, bless him. He just let me sit there and gave his sermon. Read out the Bible and gave his sermon with me sat on his foot. And that one single memory stayed with me because it kind of epitomised so much, I think, about the father heart of God, the love of God, that is really what we're supposed to encounter when we go to church. Church isn't about so many of the things we make it about. It's about a family of people through which we can encounter the father heart of God, God in his love. And I think that saved it for me. That single episode meant so much to me.
I understand your gap year was in Mexico.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, I'd got into surfing as a teenager, right? So I grew up in Guildford. Guildford doesn't have any surf.
There's not much surfing in Guildford, I know that.
But there were a group of us who, anyway, we got into surfing, and we used to go down to mushy waves on the south coast, places like East Wittering. And I wanted a gap year. I think I'd had quite a safe upbringing, and I wanted to do something a bit different, as teenagers do of that age. And my friends found in the back of Surfer magazine this little advert saying there was a Christian missions called Surfers for Missions International, and they ran a 6-month scheme in Mexico, which was basically, go around surf spots and learn the Bible and talk to people about Jesus. And I thought, great. And they dared me to apply. I did. Anyway, I ended up going. It was actually a discipleship training school, a DTS run by YWAM, a brilliant, brilliant missions agency. And there I discovered something totally different, not just in terms of the waves, which were epic and way above my skill level. So it's pretty scary, actually. Experience of being out in big waves when you know that the only way to get back to the beach is to take off on one of these monsters. That's pretty scary. But more so was the sort of daring, the challenge to do with my faith. I rediscovered the love of talking openly with people about Jesus. I don't know, I guess my upbringing being a bit middle class, and I'd sort of picked up from somewhere a bit of timidity about my faith, as though it's sort of a very private thing and you don't want to bother anyone else with it somehow. I don't know where that came from, but to get rid of that was just so freeing. Thank God. And I met some amazing, amazing people for whom the love of God and belief in Christ was not a kind of theory or a nice add-on to their middle-class values. It was life and death.
Yeah. So I guess faith became a bit more kind of real for you at that point.
Much more real. Much more real.
And then you were back to university, I guess, after the gap year, after you had your fun on your gap year.
Yeah.
Off to do some serious studying. What's your memories of your time at university?
Well, I crashed and burned a bit at uni. I went to Cardiff, which is an amazing, fantastic city. But when I went there, my memory of the first couple of terms is just of raining. And I found myself on my own. I felt like a fish out of water. I suppose I'd come back from my gap year with, the one downside of the experiences I'd had was that they were kind of intense, I guess, from a Christian, a spiritual point of view, and I had a bit of a culture clash coming back here. I found myself on my own. I started making some bad choices. In particular, met a young woman who kind of represented everything that I'd never experienced in my safe Christian upbringing, and I went for it in this sort of disastrous relationship, really, that sort of chewed me up, and that took me a good while to recover from. In fact, it was whilst I was away between my second and third year at university. I went and did a year in Europe, so I lived in Spain for a year. 6 months in Madrid, 6 months in Barcelona, and I broke up with this girlfriend of the time whilst I was in Barcelona, and I found myself absolutely broken. And it's often said, you never find out that God is all you need until God is all you've got. And that's what I found in Barcelona. I was on my own. I was crushed by my own guilt, by my loneliness. I didn't have any money. I'd actually got thrown out of the flat that I was living in, and so I was kind of sofa surfing on loose friendships. I had a guitar with me, so I thought, I don't have any money, not got any friends, I'll busk, right? I am a terrible singer, and whatever. I enjoy it, but I'm not that good at it.
I mean, even if you were, to be fair, to make a living from busking is pretty tough, I think.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but I certainly didn't. You know what my strategy was? This is honest. There was one jewellery store, really upmarket jewellery store. I knew that if I went to busk outside, the manager would immediately come out and pay me quite good money to move to just go and bus somewhere else, because I was putting off his customers.
Pay you to stop playing.
Exactly. That was my strategy. So that's how low my self-esteem had got,
So, you'd had this amazing experience, like you said. You'd come back from Mexico, I guess a bit kind of on fire for God, having seen amazing things happen. And then, as you say, when you hit university, it kind of all went wrong. I mean, I've heard stories like that from other people. If you can go away and have the most amazing spiritual time, be on this high, and yet when you kind of come back to reality, rather than that spiritual fervour carrying on, somehow the place and culture of the time actually eats you up. It goes in almost the wrong direction. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of factors for different people. I mean, one thing I do know is that it's why the student ministry is such an important thing in our nation, and certainly in Bournemouth, it was one of the first things we invested into. Was really Bournemouth's a big university town. Somewhere between 20 and 30,000 students go there, and evangelising and discipling the student population is just really important. A lot of people, I think, experience what I experienced, which actually is the loneliness. It's hard to form really meaningful friendships. There's a lot of people you can go out and get drunk with. Yeah. That's easy. But finding meaningful friendships, people you can really do life with and who will support you and you can support them, doing all that, I think is hard to find in a kind of immediately constructed community. It's why we partner with Fusion, who I think is a really critical missions and much more than just mission agency, but their lead with that group in the UK, I think, is just fantastic. Yeah. So we're partnering with them. But I think for myself, there in Barcelona, I had to discover that God was actually real for me personally, and that he still loved me when I was at my worst. I think I still had that thing of a bit of a performance mindset. Like if I could be really good and keep being good, then God would love me. Yeah. I'd be one of his favourites, and we could do great stuff together. I think I had to discover, and I think actually we all at some point or other need to discover that, you know what, I'm just a sinner saved by grace like everybody else. Absolutely. And that's the beginning of all things good.
So the busking thing didn't work out?
No.
So what came next?
No, my busking career was, fortunately for the world, short-lived. Well, I returned from Barcelona a new man, I think. I was a bit of a prodigal in that sense, I suppose, Sam. And you know, I discovered the love of God that in a life-transforming way. And I wanted to make the most of that third year at university. And you know, I wanted it because I felt called to it. And I said there was something within me. There was a new drive there. So I really gave myself to it and did really well. Was surprised at the end of it. I got hauled into my professor's office and asked why I hadn't applied for the PhD program. Well, you know, I'd never, it had never crossed my mind to do so. Anyway, he said there was this PhD program and really wanted me to join. So yeah, I then joined a research group and did a PhD in 3 years.
What was the PhD in?
In psychology, in social psychology, applying that to within business science. And you know, it was an indulgence in many ways. I got to read all this fascinating models of social psychology. Learned a lot about how I worked, how people worked, how relationships between people work, and the research was about applying that to the business world. But yeah, I eventually decided professional academia wasn't for me, and that's when I went into accountancy.
Went into accountancy, working in the City of London.
Yeah, and then I started off in Cardiff actually, and then transferred to London. I'd got involved with a really great church. By that stage, I lived just outside Newport, and there was a great community church there that was. They helped me sort of rediscover church a bit. I think, you know, they weren't interested in the shiny stuff. It was just doing life, warts and all. And that at that point in my life was really attractive, felt real.
So tell me the story of how you met your wife, Debbie.
Well, this is a bit of a dodgy one.
Dodgy one?
Well, it's a dodgy in respect of I met my wife, Debbie, when I was 17 and she was 11.
Oh,
it was not romantic. It was not romantic at that stage. Okay, certainly from my direction. How it worked, I was actually helping on a team that runs camps for Christian kids camps. What a brilliant thing that is. And I was on the team. I was the potato peeler, the most junior team member. Debbie and her sister were on that camp. They're from Liverpool, so there was these two sort of Liverpudlian Scouser kids. They were kind of annoying, but really fun. They had shell suits. They wore shell suits that apparently weren't matching, but in my memory, they were matching shell suits. Yeah, it wasn't until years later when, with the same family of camps, I ended up on doing a ski holiday on team, doing a ski holiday for teenagers. And we took a coachload of teenagers out to Switzerland. And Debbie happened to be on that team as well.
So she was on team. She wasn't a teenager at this point?
No. She was 23 by this stage.
Okay, so the age gap was no longer...
The age... Well, I've
it's
always...
different, isn't it? When you're a kind of teenager or when you're a kid, like that age gap, like you said, sounds really awful. Once you get a bit older in your 20s and 30s, that sort of stuff doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I tell you, I walked into the team preparation conference, ahead of the holiday, all the teams get together, and I walked in and, there was Debbie Calvert in the entrance hall. And I just thought, Debbie Calvert, you have changed in lots of good ways, And I just thought, wow. And I just thought, wow, she's hot and she's funny and she's intelligent and she's got such a deep, sincere faith. And yeah, so I then, spent the holiday really trying to hit on her, which she claims that she didn't realise, right? So I was kind of, trying to spend all the time. And it's hard because you're in front of a group of teenagers, the whole time. The moment there's any kind of romantic spark between the team, they're going to sniff it out and make it really hard work. So at the lunch breaks, in the ski lodges, I'd try and feed Debbie these illicit brandy laced drinks, because the team aren't supposed to drink while you're on those holidays. Quite rightly.
The revelations coming out of this interview right now.
Oh my gosh. Can we edit this? I hope I might get hauled in front of some border. Anyway, that's what happened. And but Debbie claims never to have realised that that's what I was doing, right? So I thought I was flirting outrageously. as I suspect some men may empathise with me in this. I thought I was flirting outrageously.
Yeah.
Debbie is like, no, you weren't flirting at all. You know, why didn't you make it more obvious? But she did say to me, it is weird on that holiday because I was a much better skier in the afternoons. I was just so much more loose and confident. And I was like, I'll tell you why.
The brandy. That's brilliant. I love the story. It's in the book as well. The story of one of your first dates really amused me as well, of the restaurant story in London.
Oh, my gosh.
Do you want to tell that story?
Well, Debbie still reminds me of this from time to time. This is so bad. But I was 3 hours late to our first date.
That's quite a long time.
That is quite bad, isn't it? And I was driving from Cardiff to London. And,
that's a long way to go, by the way.
Right. So I was making an effort in my defence.
Did you get caught in rush hour traffic?
I got caught in rush hour traffic, indeed. And anyway, we ended up going to this. Debbie had waited for me, which is a pretty good sign on your first date. If a girl waits for you for 3 hours.
Wow, yeah.
You know that you're in with a chance. Anyway, I thought, how do I redeem this situation? So, we went out to this meal. I was trying to be super nice, and but Deb, you need to know, Debbie's quite competitive, right? And so anyway, we were having a lovely time, and we were at this Lebanese place, and there was a plate. One of the dishes had come with a plate of chilies, if you wanted to take them. And I thought, because I'd been in Mexico, I thought I recognised some of those, and they're pretty hot chilies. Debbie didn't, and she thought they were sweet peppers. So Debbie says to me, "Oh, do you want any sweet peppers?" I said, "No, Debs, I think they're chilies." Yeah. She said, "No, they are sweet peppers." I was like, "Well, I'm not going to have them because I think they're pretty hot chilies." She said, "I'll show you." She's picked up 3, popped them in her mouth, and started chewing. Oh. Well, her face went from the sort of beautiful light tan that she had through pink to just like, purple sweat. She downed her drink. She reached across the table and downed my drink. By this time she was crying. Then she grabbed the jug, and she couldn't speak for 10 minutes. All of the other people in the restaurant were looking at me wanting to kill me because they thought, I'd like dumped this poor girl or something. Made her cry, driven her to drink, so I was lucky to get out of there with my life.
Wow, what a great story. Of course, you and,
my busking and my dating techniques kind of, go hand in hand.
It all worked out in the end, and you and Debbie have since parted the church, and we'll move on to talk about that in a moment. But before we get there, so you're working as an accountant in the city. Now, my perception of that kind of a job is it's incredibly well paid. Some would say lucrative. You could probably get accustomed to a very nice lifestyle with a job like that. Was that the case for you?
Well, hand on heart, it probably was. To be honest, I suppose I do fit that caricature a bit. I wasn't working for the money, but I enjoyed the money that came. I was very fortunate in that I worked for a great firm that had good leadership and became, reasonably good at it. And they were looking, and I was looking to progress in my career. And sure, that the upper echelons of the partners in that firm were earning megabucks. I
think you say in the book, the kind of long-term career plan would be to kind of get to where your bosses were. And you're talking about, £600,000 salary. This is some serious money. So the question is, of course, what made you give up that career path and go off and study theology at Oxford?
Yeah, well, I think I'd have talked a really good game at the time about the importance of having Christian people working in the city and receiving the remuneration that comes with it and funneling that into the church and so on. And I really do believe in that. I mean, I think it's incredibly important that working men and women are supported and equipped and that the kingdom is built and established in those places, in the corporate world. It's incredibly important that we help people connect their faith to their work. That, as a friend of mine, Ken Costa, says, so that their workstation can become their worship station. That's really what I'm all about. And I'd have talked a really good game about, that's what I'm trying to do. When it came to it, for me personally, this other, as I've said earlier, I felt really uncomfy about the idea that I might be called out of that into ordination. And I mean, you mentioned the money. for me personally, I'm not proud of this, but the money actually had more of a hold on me than I realised. I wasn't earning anywhere near the megabucks you've mentioned, but I mean, the money that I was receiving had more of a grip on me than I realised.
I think it would on anyone.
Well, I don't know. I know some amazing people who I think are able to handle wealth with real godly wisdom and courage, and are incredibly generous with it. But yeah, I mean, I perhaps there's others who struggle with that, and I think I was more in that group, if I'm honest. Even though I'd have talked a really good game about it. And I thought, we're putting in a decent sized tithe every month and helping the church, offerings on top of that. We're able to be generous to these other things.
It's pretty easy to sort of rationalise,
Well, sadly, I found that to be the case, yeah, but
you think, yes, it's a lot of money, yes, it's a comfortable lifestyle, but like you say, I'm putting a lot into God's kingdom, putting a lot back into the church. But you did feel called away from that ultimately into...
Well, I think the issue is, you mentioned the word call there, and the purpose of it is incredibly important at a certain level, because I think actually to have progressed within the corporate world, it's incredibly difficult and very challenging. And I think feeling called to that is just as essential actually as feeling called into ministry and church leadership, which is also very difficult. I mean, a very different set of challenges. I think it's essential that we, all of us, have a sense of God's call for our lives, what actually God wants us to do, or the way He wants us to do whatever He puts in front of us. That feeling of purpose, that inner cause, it gives us a drive and an energy and a sense that we are with God and God is with us, and we're doing this by the power of the Holy Spirit, not by our own independence. That is really important for anyone. And looking back, I didn't really have that for the commercial world. Whereas the more I considered church leadership, actually I kind of discovered, as a process of discerning, I discovered, I think that's what God has me. But in the end, it took a bit of a step of faith. I had to, it took some courage. And I approached it very cowardly, right until the last moment, where I actually thought, I need to resign and go for it. I don't want to spend the rest of my life thinking, what if,
You're listening to Premier Christian Radio. I'm Sam Hales, interviewing Tim Matthews today on The Profile. This is the show where we delve into a person's life, faith and testimony. And today we're really hearing the story of how Tim and his wife, Debbie, planted a new church in Bournemouth. It's St Swithun's, also known as Love Church. And as we've been hearing, it's been a difficult journey, and he's been opening up about really the highs and the lows of that experience. There's loads more to come in part 2, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the second half of my interview with Tim Matthews right after this.
Premier Christianity Magazine. In this month's issue,
we speak with best-selling Christian author Francine Rivers, whose hugely popular novel Redeeming Love defined a generation. In this rare interview, she explains how her most loved characters came to life and reveals the reason she doesn't want people reading some of her books. Plus, does believing in God give you an edge in the boxing ring? The man who trained former heavyweight champion Tyson Fury seems to think so. And discover the true meaning of 5 important biblical words. All this and more in November's issue.
For your free copy, visit premierchristianity.com/free sample.
Good news, we've slashed the cost of subscribing to the UK's leading Christian magazine. Now you can read news from a Christian perspective and interviews with fascinating leaders for half the normal price. That's 12 issues of Premier Christianity magazine for less than £20. Plus, take out a subscription and we'll enter you into a prize draw to win £200 worth of new Christian books. There's never been a better time to subscribe. Go to premierchristianity.com/subscribe.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Good afternoon, you're listening to Premier Christian Radio with me, Sam Hales. This is The Profile, the show where we look at a person's life, faith and testimony. And today I'm talking to Tim Matthews from Love Church in Bournemouth. It's an amazing story of how just a small team moved down from London to Bournemouth in the summer of 2014 to begin a new work. And now Sunday attendance across both of St Swithun sites is regularly over 600 people. How did it happen? What was the journey for the church leader, Tim Matthews? We finished part one with Tim talking about this call to ministry that came about after he was working in the City of London and he was trying to discern whether God was calling him to be a church leader. Let's pick up the conversation now.
We were still at a fantastic church down in Peckham, All Saints Peckham. That's where Debbie and I had really got together. That's where we were married. The vicar at that time is a lovely bloke, very wise and fun guy called Frog or Ewing. It's fun just because he's called Frog. You don't meet many vicars called Frog. But actually, when it reached the stage for me of needing to talk to someone, I talked to Frog, and I just said, look, I just can't believe that God would call me into church leadership. I don't feel at all the right type for it. And Frog said, well, does the future church need more of the same leaders we've got right now or different kind of leaders? And I sort of thought, well, I suppose it needs different leaders because lots of new stuff's got to occur and we need to turn around a bit of a tricky situation. And, you know, the UK's becoming an increasingly kind of a missional context rather than a pastoral context and all that. And Frog said, well, there you go. If you're a different leader, you're going to be looking at the church at the moment thinking that I'm not a match for it. Yeah. But actually, God's wanting you for the future.
Absolutely.
So his faith really helped me. And
wise answer from Frog.
Yeah, he's a wise man.
So as I say, you went to Oxford to study theology, and then after that, I think you ended up at HTB, where you were for 6 years. Yes. And it's interesting in the book, you write that for most of the 6 years you spent at HTB, you were trying to leave.
Well, yeah, I mean, they after the end of my first year, the whole, church plants began to come up, the possibility of church plants. That's what we wanted to do. So Debs and I started working on trying to plant a church out.
Trying to leave and go and plant a church out of HTB.
Yeah, I mean, I joke with, the HTB guys, they were trying to get rid of me and I was trying to get rid of them. But actually, the truth was HTB was an amazing place to be. And we learned so much there. Yeah,
and I mean, this is, if you don't know, this is the kind of home of the Alpha course, which is now just this internationally renowned course. It's the home of things like the marriage course, Nikki and Silla Lee, who've written a lot about relationships. It's where Worship Central came out of with Tim Hughes and those guys. So, the influence of HTB, I think many people will recognise is absolutely huge. And I guess in recent years, as you say, what we've seen is HTB now start to plant out not only into other areas of London, but now other areas of the country. So whether it's Brighton or Bournemouth, which obviously we'll talk about, or up in Birmingham, and I think other places that don't begin with B as well.
Norwich doesn't begin with a B.
So tell me more about this kind of time you're in HTB, because it was amazing to read in the book. You talk about you felt called by God to plant a church, and there were all of these different opportunities coming up, and yet so many times you would think you're about to go somewhere and it would fall through. And I think the number you quote is 12 times that happened for you, which must have just been so difficult, of living with something, saying, God, we're called to this, and then it not coming through. So share some of the stories of that time and how you managed to persevere through that kind of difficulty.
Yeah, well, as you say, it was a story of two halves, because on the one half was getting to hang out with these amazing leaders, Nicky Gumbel, Nikki Lee, Ken Costa, Tim Hughes, Pete Gregg of 24/7, who was there leading the prayer ministry at that time, many others. And so on the one hand, it was an extraordinary time for to be part of and learning from people like that. Al Gordon, who's gone on to lead St John at Hackney, and the amazing work that's now happening there. I learnt so much from him, and the other, all the guys involved in Alpha, as you say. So there was this, on the one hand, it was an incredible place to be part of. And then on the other was this story of failure after failure after failure, 12 projects that came and went. Some of them very painfully. Because when you're going to plant out a church, it reaches a certain stage where you really have to imagine moving your family there, what schools they're going to go to, where you're going to live, what's the nature of the project. You spend a lot of time talking to people, doing the research, building up your plans, praying like anything for these projects. You kind of emotionally have to you really begin to move towards that. And kind of God, you're believing at the time that that's a God thing, that God's given you a compassion, a missional vision for that place. And so you really emotionally move towards it. And of course, then it's the truth is a lot of different factors have to come together to plant churches. And it's becoming easier, I hope, and I believe to do that. But
Yeah.
I guess 10 years ago now, that wasn't the case.
And I guess it's worth talking about this within the context of the church you're in. So this is church planting within the context of the Church of England. And HTB's vision, as I understand it, has been to kind of revitalise often existing church buildings that may have closed down or go derelict, and kind of go in and almost replant and start something there. Now, that's quite a different way of thinking about church planting for some people. There'll be other, in more kind of new streams of church, who will think about church planting as, well, you kind of start from scratch with a life group, and then you kind of build your own purpose-built building. So what would be your response to the kind of criticism that says, well, actually, in the 21st century, don't we need modern purpose-built buildings? Isn't that actually more cost-effective over time, rather than trying to keep these older buildings open? Can you explain some of the rationale behind why you tend to go for the existing Church of England kind of buildings?
Well, you're absolutely right, Sam, that what really matters in this country is the church in England, rather than the Church of England. Jesus has only got one body. There's only one church. The Church of England is a part of it, but joined to all the others. And we are learning so much within the Church of England, learning so much from those other church planting streams. But I do believe that the Church of England still has a role to play. I think part of it, when you refer to the buildings, part of it is still that the Church of England and Church of England buildings have something of a kind of iconic role in many communities. You look at a map, lots of the street names are named after the church. You look at the schools, many of the schools are named after the same as what the church, hospitals, other things. So, and the location of church buildings is often right in the heart of communities. And that was certainly the case for us at St Swithun's, but even more so at our first church plant out of St Swithun's. We partnered with a church in the middle of what had been described to us as the most deprived community in the southwest, Boscombe, a neighbourhood in a deprived neighbourhood in Bournemouth. And there was a Church of England church there called St Clement's, where numbers had dwindled, but a faith-filled, courageous, small congregation there who had kept that building going and that site, but who actually were desperate to see mission occur, desperate for their church schools to be better supported. And so we partnered with them. But it's iconic. Within Boscombe, St Clement's is iconic.
There's this phrase that gets used quite a lot in kind of HTB circles that has been really interesting to come across, which is empty church buildings are like an empty palace of a long-forgotten king. People walk past and think that the king is dead. And this sense that actually, if you have an empty church building in a local community, that might give a negative impression to those who live there. And there's something to be said for kind of
I think
that
that quote originated. That wasn't an HTB quote. That's another archdeacon within London Diocese. But I think it's right. We don't get to choose. I don't get to choose what someone who is unchurched and what an unchurched young person in Bournemouth thinks about the church. I don't get to choose. I wish they didn't have the negative preconceptions that they carry, but many of them do. And it's kind of part of my job is to break that negative preconception. And so I go to talking to a hairdresser or whatever, saying, that my starting point is God's love. The Bible says God is love. Love is God's core characteristic. We also, universally, humans' core need is for love. You know, the Beatles got that right. You know, all you need is love.
Yeah.
So what we find is that there is a match between our core need and God's core characteristic. And of course, that's where you see that met is on the cross of Christ, but it's experienced in and through God's people, through the church. And so when the church is the place where that match can occur and be experienced and felt as people experience the love of God through His Spirit in God's people. And so we try really hard to break that negative preconception that the Church of England is basically about a cold, drafty, stone, boring, austere building in which there are some ceremonies experienced in a jargon that I don't understand, dressed by people whose the symbolic references I don't get. It's alien, and it's not particularly welcoming, and I just can't enter into what's going on. And it makes me feel like an outsider when I go. We try really hard to break that preconception, and I think that is happening all around the Church of England now. People invariably, I've spoken to a lot of people who have gone to their local Church of England church and been surprised at the warmth of welcome and how engaging services are.
I think, we do just live in a culture and a climate now where so many people are just completely disengaged from anything church or Christian related. I mean, it was fascinating after the royal wedding to hear people talk about Bishop Michael Curry's sermon about, wow, he was so full of passion and energy. And some people were sort of saying, you do realise there are lots of churches in many denominations up and down the country with that style of passionate preaching, both inside and outside of the Church of England. But as you say, people just don't know that, do they? Because they're not going to church and they're not hearing it.
Well, we've got to overcome that view, and I think. Thank God, I think that is being overcome. I mean, you look at the church in the UK now, not just the Church of England, but across. You think, well, who's running the food banks? That's the church. Who's still educating a huge number of children in our nation? That's the church. Who's looking after isolated, vulnerable older people? Well, the church is doing a huge job there. You look at, particularly in our age of austerity, as some of the services have been, wound back. I think it's the church that's picking up a lot of that. Caring for ex-offenders is another big area. In Bournemouth, addictions and addiction recovery is a massive theme, and that's been a huge and very exciting part of the ministry that we've been involved with. And I've seen people experience freedom in Jesus that's not theoretical. It's an intellectual belief. It's a felt life-changing thing.
The book is really honest and open, as you say, about some of the ups and downs. I wanted to read out this section from chapter 7. So this is before, really, the church.
This is always dangerous, Sam, when people read back your own book at you and you think, oh, my God.
Did I really write that?
Yeah.
Well, I think, it just shows some of the reality. Because, again, I think when some people think of Holy Trinity Brompton and Church Pint, they just think, oh, yeah, there's loads of resources. It's really easy. They go in there and the churches suddenly grow. And what I appreciate about the book is you're very honest about it's not as easy as that. Anyway, this is the beginning of chapter 7, No Turning Back, where you say everything had gone wrong. It looked as if St Swithun's wouldn't be happening after all. There was a lot of local resistance to the idea of a new church plant, especially moving to a building the Church of England has sold off such a long time ago. We had no money to buy it, and the owners were in conversation with a developer who had seemingly unlimited funds. None of the Church of England's houses in Bournemouth were available for us to move into. There were no school places for our children. The diocese couldn't agree on the legal structure of the new ministry and seemed to be getting cold feet. I was getting demoralised. We had no joy recruiting a team to come to us. Understandably, given all this, the HTB leadership began to doubt the project was ever going to happen and started to ask if I should look elsewhere. It pained me to admit that they might be right. So this must have been a kind of rock bottom.
A lot of the book is like a bit more positive than that.
This was a kind of rock bottom. Well, we will talk about the positive bits of the book, but I've got to be honest. I come across quite a lot of books about church planting, and not all of them. A lot of them, let's say, are not as open about the downsides. And I say, I think there is a perception sometimes of big movements like HTB where it all kind of just looks like it all works. And I think it's fascinating to realise there were these 12 attempts that you had before this that we haven't even gone into that didn't work out. But tell me me more about this moment where you're getting rock bottom,
Yeah.
where you're at rock bottom, and the HTB leadership even were beginning to doubt whether you could actually move down to Bournemouth because there's local resistance and lack of school places and all these things that you mentioned. So what happened next?
Well, as you say, I just thought, here we go again. God, this is another failure. You mentioned all those other failed projects that we've been through, and I think God had taught us perseverance, looking back. And I remember Nicky saying to me, Nicky Gumbel, that is, who I worked for, the priest there, the vicar there at HDB, at that time, the time that you mentioned there, saying to me, Tim, at some point you're going to look back on all these failed projects, and that a project will come along that you'll think, this is what all those failures, all that I've learned in those failures, is for this and for this time. And I remember saying to Nicky, this project is that one. I think, Sam, for me, Debbie and I, by that stage, were utterly convinced that this was what God was calling us to do, to plant to Bournemouth. Actually, to be quite honest with you, by that stage, I'd sort of considered, well, if the Church of England don't want to send me to Bournemouth, what do I do, God? Do I need to resign and just go and start a church on ourselves? How do I obey you in this if the Church of England doesn't want to do it? But that wasn't a sort of heroic, like, here we come to save Bournemouth in the power of Jesus. It was broken. It was desperate. And it was born of prayer. Up to that point, I just spent 6 months or more praying for Bournemouth, and I used to go down there on train journeys from London and trudge around in the rain, prayer walking. And
you even took some soil back to London with you at one point and prayed over it, didn't you?
Well, I think the thing with prayer that I've learned is that, again, it's not something you learn when you're kind of in heroic mode. It's something that's learnt in the difficult times. Yeah, there was a time where I went down, trudged around in the rain, and I thought, how do I keep this prayer going? I was utterly convinced, despite all the evidence, God wanted us to start a church in this the site of St Swithun's. It looked absolutely impossible. So I thought, well, what else can I do but pray? There was nothing else I could do. I thought, well, how do I keep this prayer going then, God? So I had one of those little Tupperware plastic boxes with me in my soggy sandwiches for lunch, chucked those in the bin and scooped up some soil. The thing about the soil around the site is quite sandy soil in Bournemouth, and a lot of pine trees, so it's quite aromatic. And back in London then, very often in my quiet times, I had a tiny, tiny box room desk in there, some books. That's where I used to pray in our house. And I'd get a big sheet of paper and pour out that soil on the floor. I'd take my shoes off and I'd stand in the soil, and I could smell it. And that I sort of gave my whole body to praying each day for the site. Yeah, that for a long time, the only place where that church plant existed was in prayer. That's what it was born out of.
Yeah,
and
it happened.
Well, it did happen. I think it reached the stage where actually we kind of had. There's times in life where you have to put your neck on the block. That is what chapter 7 talks about. Yeah.
There you go. So we need to bring this more up to date, and I'd love to hear, what went right. You've been really open about some of your failures, stuff that went wrong, but what went right when you moved down to Bournemouth? And because we are now talking about a thriving, very successful church, probably no longer accurate to describe it as a church plant because it's functioning by itself. You've even planted out, as you mentioned, into Boscombe. So what went right, and what was the kind of journey of once you moved down there and it's starting to grow? What do you kind of attribute that to?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of different factors, and some of it is stuff that's far outside of my control. But I suppose there's 3 things that just come to mind. And number 1 is the prayer. That has continued. We still pray an awful lot. And as I say, that's not born of a strength or a deep resource. It's born of desperation. We still carry this, oh, God, would you revisit Bournemouth? Would you save Bournemouth? It's painful sometimes to carry. I feel that compassion for unchurched younger generations, younger people in Bournemouth who don't know that Jesus loves them. If only they did, their lives would be so much better. There's so much that God has for them. Their lives would be so good. And I don't want them to miss out on that. So it's prayer. I think the second thing, is we put worship first and foremost. So the first team member that we hired was a worship leader.
That's pretty unusual, isn't it? I mean, often the first person is an administrator or a youth worker. Maybe,
yeah. I mean, we just felt we've got to put worship at the core of this. I think I'd become convinced by that. So maybe I've hung around Tim Hughes for too long. But
well, blame Tim Hughes.
Yeah, blame Tim Hughes. Bless Tim and Rachel Hughes. Where would we be without them? Goodness. But I'd become convinced that when you look at the history of God's people through the Old Testament, it's especially clear, but it's the same in the New Testament. Basically, everything hinges on their worship life. When their worship life goes south, God's people get into trouble. Whereas where worship is put at the core of the nation's identity and their activity, and there's huge investment into it, first and foremost, that's when things go well. Even the returning exile, even when everything's gone wrong and they've been exiled, and the returning exile, what's the first thing they do? Rebuild the altar. The first place that they go to. It's not the walls. It's not rebuilding the walls that comes first. It's rebuilding the altar. It's worship, re-establishing worship. In response to Daniel's prayer, you get prayer and then you move straight into worship. And so we've kind of followed that pattern. So the first employee we hired was a worship leader. The first thing we spent money on was the PA. The equipment to really run contemporary worship well. We actually spent money on that before spending money on Bibles. I hope that's not sacrilegious to say it, but we put a big emphasis on that. And that continues. Our guys now, they've brought out this little EP called Rise Up, and we're beginning to see songs written now in context for Bournemouth by people in Bournemouth. We're beginning to see worship leaders trained and developed, going to other churches in Bournemouth, which is wonderful. So we're right at the beginning of that, but nevertheless that continues. And then the third thing is the team. I mean, I do very little. There is an amazing team of people now across both churches. And, I thank God for that every day. Debbie and I thought we were going to be quite lonely. That was our number one fear probably in leaving London, where we had great friends, and going down to Bournemouth. Actually, it couldn't have been proved more wrong. There are incredible friends there who we can do life with, but also a very skilled team of people. 99 out of every 100 things to do in the church, I can think of someone better than me to do it. And God has just given us an amazing team of people, and really it's my role to, I say to them now, I don't say to my team, here's what I want you to do. I say to them, what do you want from me to do what God's calling you to do? How can I support and encourage and shout you on?
Yes.
Because you're doing the stuff. Yes. And that's not just the staff, that's the lay leaders, it's the ministry heads, it's just people all over the place doing this amazing work.
Yeah, and you write in the book actually about some of your kind of philosophy of leadership. You actually say one of the reasons why maybe we don't have more big churches in the UK is the way we've kind of divided up leadership. And you talk about the distinction between a senior operational leader and a senior pastoral leader, and the need for both. Can you explain what the difference is there? I mean, is this some of what you've been saying already about you kind of almost cheer on the team, and you're a kind of big picture visionary guy, but you let other people get on with it, and that being quite an unusual model?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's unusual, but I mean, I think the best leaders in any kind of organisation, the best leaders, I think, see themselves as the servant of others. I was really interested recently reading Alex Ferguson's, the football coach, his book on leadership, and he talked about the difference when he was a player and he was an on-field captain and kind of leading the charge, being the talisman figure, to when he became an off-field coach, he had to enjoy a different set of activities. He had to enjoy seeing other people succeed rather than himself succeed.
Yeah.
And I think the more that leaders, people grow as leaders when they begin to enjoy seeing other people succeed and begin to sort of think, how can I help this person succeed and serve them and love them? You know, there are times where you've got to direct operations in a kind of command and control thing. You know, if there's a crisis going on and everyone's looking at you, you know, it's not a great thing to sort of go, well, what does everyone else think? You know, they're looking at you to like, help. But actually, if you stay in that mode too long, people feel, I'm not trusted. I'm not getting the chance to the autonomy, the creative space to do what I feel God's calling me to do. I'm really just serving someone else's agenda all the time.
I imagine one of the biggest challenges in doing something like this is when it comes to other churches and you wanting to sort of turn up and you wanting to be a help, but you also don't want to sort of come charging in and give the wrong impression, as you say, that you're the kind of saviour of Bournemouth when other people are doing good work. So you probably want to manage relationships well with other church leaders. But also connected to that is how do you stop people from other churches leaving where they're at and thinking, oh, it's a new HTB church plant, or I quite like, you know, the songs they do, or I quite like their philosophy, I'm going to leave my church and join them. I mean, to a certain extent, there's probably nothing you can do to stop that happening. But, you know, if people are going to move, they're going to move. But what were the considerations, both with trying to network with other local church leaders and also trying to make sure you're not, to use a silly phrase, but I understand it gets used in church leader circles, sheep stealing?
Well, there's a couple of different things there. I mean, first of all, you know, it is a question of leadership, as we were talking about, you know, and I learned from some amazing leaders at HTB. I mean, Nicky Gumbel is... he's the real deal. You know, he taught me so much. He's a very, very godly man. And he, even though he actually is an incredibly skilled operator, he listens to people and he serves and loves people and, you know, and the younger leaders around him. And so when I first went down to Bournemouth and the bishops and archdeacons would introduce me to the other church leaders, who understandably had a lot of questions about what was being proposed. I mean, don't forget, you know, now there's more and more talk about church plants. It's more and more in the common parlance. But, you know, this was like 5.5 years ago. There was less of that. There was more suspicion. And more misunderstanding, more potential for misunderstanding. So when I met those other leaders, you know, I just did everything I could to refute any idea that they had that I was somehow coming in, riding in, you know, blowing the trumpets, going, here we are to, you know, do what you're not doing, or whatever ridiculous notion. I took quite the opposite stance. So I would beg them for a cup of coffee and then say, look, here's what the bishop wants us to do is inviting us to do, but I know nothing. I've got nothing. You're here, you're in context, you've got all the wisdom. Please, would you help me? Because I don't know, you know, I need to learn from you. I need to understand what you know, if together we're to do what the bishops and our leaders are inviting us to do. And so I'd always come in and take the lower. Now, it wasn't strategy, Sam. That's the difference. You've got to have integrity with it. I wasn't trying to, you know, get round them as a clever relational.
You actually wanted their advice. You weren't just putting it on.
Well, but I never thought of us as, oh, we really know what we're doing. Oh, what are these guys playing at? You know, we'll show them. I never thought that. And I don't know any church planters who do feel that. Whereas I think, you know, sometimes people look at the smoothie bars and smoke machines and shiny guitars and think, oh, you know, these guys just, you know, they think they're God's gift to church planting. What do they know? And it puts people's backs up, quite understandably. So yeah, I think taking the low, and that amazingly, other church leaders in Bournemouth responded with such grace to us and faith and courage. You know, more than one said, this is exactly what we need, even though it was going to cause disruption for them. We had help and support from people. When we started, we didn't have any chairs, right? And because poor at planning. I didn't realise quite that we didn't have enough chairs until about 2-3 days before we launched. Actually, because my expectation was of something really small, and we got the notion that quite a lot of people were going to start turning up possibly. And so I thought, oh gosh, the 30 or 40 chairs that we've got aren't going to be enough. So some of those other church leaders, I just rang around saying, help, have you got any chairs? One church leader said, you can have our chairs. They're all up. Our old chairs are up in the tower loft. They're covered in pigeon poo, but you can have them. So we went, scrubbing down all these chairs. But there was another church leader who said, you're going to need more chairs than that, Tim, this Sunday. I will drive some over to you. And bless him, before his own church service started that Sunday morning, he was driving over chairs. Yeah. So
it's amazing.
Putting yourself at other people's mercy really helps. Yeah. On the transfer growth thing, all I can do is prove that that's not true. We actually do an annual church survey that proves it's not true.
Okay, so you actually know how many people are kind of
we do
new and how many people are not. Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Do you know the numbers off the top of your head roughly on what that would be? So there's 600 people there roughly at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it comes in. There's different groups is the answer. So because we're a new Anglican church, there were some people in Bournemouth who were always after a contemporary, worship-led, informal thing that came, and they were worshipping they had gone and joined non-Church of England places for a couple of years, but actually really wanted to return to the Church of England, so that's fine. Yeah. But the two groups that were the main groups was, number one, Christians who hadn't been in church for a very long time.
Right, okay.
One family comes to mind where actually the young daughter had been bought by her granny on one of our first Sundays, loved Sunday school, went back home, told her mum and dad, you're taking me to church next Sunday. They said, no. Sunday is about papers, coffee, sports. You can go with Gran again. Well, Gran couldn't take her. So she spent the whole week absolutely nagging them. The dad eventually gave in, brought her back. He's been every Sunday since. Wow. He hadn't been in church for 20 years. Bought his wife. She eventually, through Alpha, came to faith. We've run Alpha every term. That's been incredibly important for us. Massive engine for church growth. Yeah. And lots besides. Yeah. And the wife came to faith. The young girl's older brother came to faith, and that family is now core. So there's a lot of people like that. And then, sure, there's people who have come to faith with no church background whatsoever. In fact, there's people who have come to faith at St Swithun who simply Googled it and have turned up not even knowing anyone who was there, not having a friendship relationship at all. So I think that there is some transfer growth, but hand on heart, church planters don't want it. No. And many people who transfer in come with unrealistic expectations or high pastoral need, that's not helpful. Hand on heart, some is very helpful, and I think that's where the Holy Spirit, we must allow him to redistribute his people, send leaders, people who come with not a mindset to consume, but to serve. We had some very gracious other churches in Bournemouth who commissioned some one or two people to come in on that basis. And so I think you do need that. But, there's only one church in Bournemouth. We keep saying this. Jesus has only got one body. There's only one church. Absolutely. You can't leave one church and join another. It's just we're all in this together.
Well, there's so much more I would love to ask you about, Tim, but unfortunately we are out of time. If you want to find out more, I highly recommend Love Church, Join the Adventure of Hope by Tim Matthews, published by Hodder Stoughton. It's out now. The story of how St Swithun started with just 11 adults and now around 600 people are worshipping across 2 sites every Sunday. Tim, it's been great to hear your story. Thanks so much for coming in.
Sam, thank you.
I'm Sam Hales, and you've been listening to the Profile podcast, brought to you by Premier Christian Radio in association with Premier Christianity magazine. That's the UK's leading Christian magazine, and we have got a very special offer on for you right now. Would you like a year's subscription for half the normal price? If you would, and you want to subscribe right now, we will also enter you into a prize draw to win £200 worth of new Christian books. It really is a fantastic offer. It's our special half-price offer, which we have extended a little bit longer, so you can still take advantage if you hurry now to our website, premierchristianity.com/subscribe. Here's what you'll get. You're going to get 12 issues of the UK's leading Christian magazine in print, direct through your letterbox each and every month. You're also going to get full online access to our website, including over 10 years worth of archive material. You're also going to get entered into that prize draw to win £200 worth of Christian books. All of that for less than £20 for your first year. premierchristianity.com/subscribe. If you're already a subscriber, then thank you. It's people like you who make podcasts like this possible. And if, of course, you have been enjoying today's episode, and I hope you have, we'd be really grateful if you would share it with others. Why not stick a post out on social media? Why not give us a rating and a review wherever you found this podcast? Share it with your friends. We would be really, really grateful. Tim Matthews has been my guest on the show today. If you'd like to hear more from Tim, I do recommend his book. It's called Love Church, Join the Adventure of Hope. It is out now. It's published by Hodder and Stoughton. I highly recommend it. But for now, that does bring us to the end of the show. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.